Welcome to this first lecture in Modernism and World Literature with the Academy of History and Culture. I'm Sandra Reinartz, your guide on this journey into the captivating realm of literary modernism. Widely recognized as a groundbreaking force that shaped art, literature, and culture from the late 19th to the early 20th century, modernism represented a dramatic departure from established conventions. It brought about radical changes in how people perceived and represented their world. But this movement was more than just an aesthetic experiment. It was a direct response to the rapid modernization of society, characterized by sweeping technological, social, and cultural upheavals. To truly grasp the complexity of modernism, we must delve into the historical context that gave rise to it, analyzing its core characteristics and its lasting contributions to art and literature. Modernism was not merely a literary trend, it was a pervasive cultural movement that sought to capture a world in constant flux. To understand the emergence of modernism as a literary and artistic movement, we must consider the deep social and political transformations that defined the late 19th and early 20th centuries. This was a time of unprecedented industrialization and urbanization, reshaping not just how people lived, but also how they understood their reality. These radical societal changes created new realities that modern writers and artists endeavored to express through innovative shifts in artistic form and content. The Industrial Revolution redefined social structures and the individual's role within them, while urbanization, technological advances, and globalization introduced complexities that traditional literary forms could no longer capture. The transition from the 19th to the 20th century was marked by swift industrial growth, urban expansion, and political tensions, all of which led to significant cultural shifts. Literary historians like Malcolm Bradbury and James McFarlane emphasize that these changes weren't just the backdrop for the rise of modernism, they were the very forces driving the movement's new artistic expressions. In the following discussion, we will explore the key events and trends that were pivotal in shaping modernism and the dynamic ways it redefined the arts. So, let's dive deeper into this fascinating chapter of our cultural history. Before modernism emerged, several artistic and literary movements paved the way. Symbolism, which arose in France in the 1880s, rejected realism and naturalism in favor of a more subjective, metaphorical approach. As the literary historian Charles Baudelaire put it, the real symbolist poet does not describe the object directly but evokes it through a series of metaphors and symbols. Baudelaire, along with symbolist figures like Stéphane Mallarmé and Arthur Rimbaud, set the stage for modernism by emphasizing subjectivity, dreams, and the unconscious in art. Impressionism, both in art and literature, also played a significant role in shaping modernism. Rather than focusing on an objective depiction of reality, Impressionist artists like Claude Monet and writers such as Henry James sought to capture fleeting impressions and the transient experience of reality. This focus on subjective perspective and momentary experience was further developed by modernist writers, who aimed to depict the fragmented and internal experiences of time and space. Modernism was heavily influenced by the Industrial Revolution, which gained momentum in the late 19th century. In many ways, it marked a shift from an agricultural society to an urbanized industrial one. As Marshall Berman observed, to be modern is to find ourselves in an environment that promises adventure, power, joy, growth, transformation of ourselves and the world, and at the same time, that threatens to destroy everything we have, everything we know, everything we are. The Industrial Revolution not only transformed economic structures, but also disrupted the social order. Traditional hierarchies and lifestyles were destabilized, and a new division of labor emerged, creating sharp divides between wealth and poverty, especially visible in rapidly growing cities. While earlier writers like Charles Dickens and Émile Zola explored the social consequences of industrialization through realist techniques, modernist authors focused on the individual's experience of alienation and fragmentation. This alienation was often reflected in experimental, fragmented narrative structures. As cities grew into hubs of economic activity and cultural alienation, they fostered a sense of disorientation and isolation that many modernist writers and artists addressed in their work. In Mrs. Dalloway, Virginia Woolf explores how the anonymity and mechanized conditions of city life foster a sense of alienation. Writers like Woolf and James Joyce sought to capture these experiences through techniques like stream of consciousness, portraying the complex, fragmented experience of the modern world. Urbanization was central to shaping modernist literature. Rapidly expanding cities like London, Paris, and New York became symbols of the fragmentation and chaos of modern life. As Raymond Williams noted, the city in modernism was often depicted as a place where the individual was alienated in an anonymous crowd. The city became a symbol of modernity itself, embodying the speed, complexity, and alienation that characterized modern life. In T.S. Eliot's The Waste Land, the city symbolizes both social decay and existential emptiness. Eliot describes London as a ghostly metropolis where people move like dull heads in a purposeless existence. Here, the city becomes a microcosm of the broader modernist experience, loss of meaning and orientation in a world shaped by rapid technological and social transformations. In addition to urbanization, technological advancements played a crucial role in shaping modernism. Inventions like the telegraph, electricity, and the automobile fundamentally altered communication and transportation, changing how people experienced time and space. These technologies created a sense of acceleration and fragmentation, an experience that many modernist writers sought to capture in their works. The telegraph and the automobile, in particular, transformed perceptions of time and space. Previously, time and space were closely tied to physical distance and the slowness of travel, but these technologies allowed instant communication across vast distances and faster travel than ever before. As literary historian Stephen Kern noted in The Culture of Time and Space, the new technologies shattered traditional conceptions of space and time, making the world feel smaller, faster, and more connected. Modernist writers like James Joyce and Virginia Woolf responded to these shifts by experimenting with narrative techniques that sought to convey the fleeting and subjective experience of time and space. In Mrs. Dalloway from 1925, Woolf captures an entire day through the characters' shifting streams of consciousness, blending external and internal time in a complex structure that mirrors modernism's elastic sense of time. Modernism was deeply influenced by the dramatic political and social upheavals of the early 20th century, particularly World War I and the subsequent political radicalization that reshaped the global landscape. The brutality of the war left its mark on literature, as many modernist writers turned to their craft to process and critique the senselessness of war and the destabilizing ideologies that threatened to dissolve the moral and cultural values of the past. The war's devastating destruction and immense human cost created a pervasive sense of disillusionment that permeated post-war culture. A deep pessimism marked modernism, especially in the aftermath of World War I, as the widespread loss of life and destruction shattered faith in progress and civilization. Many modernist authors lost confidence in the ideologies and values that had dominated Western society throughout the 19th century. World War I was a profound rupture with the previous belief in progress and reason that had defined Western thought since the Enlightenment. Historian Eric Hobsbawm described this period as a shock to Western civilization. The Great War destroyed the illusion that human progress was inevitable and undermined the belief in rationality and order that had underpinned European society. T.S. Eliot's The Waste Land from 1922 stands as one of the most iconic examples of this disillusionment. Through its fragmented and complex structure, Eliot expresses deep pessimism about Western culture, which he saw as morally and culturally disintegrating. The poem, often seen as emblematic of modernist pessimism, portrays a world in chaos, where cultural and moral breakdown is ever present. Literary critic Michael Levinson describes the wasteland as a landscape of shattered faith and spiritual emptiness. Eliot uses various techniques to depict this dissolution. filling his poem with fragmented references to past cultural works, such as Dante's Inferno and Shakespeare's The Tempest. These references, however, are disjointed pieces of a lost cultural unity. As literary historian Christopher Butler argues, Eliot's allusions suggest a lost unity, a disintegration of cultural continuity, which the modern world cannot recover. This thematic and formal fragmentation is characteristic of modernism as a literary movement, serving as a metaphor for the disillusioned post-war world. Critics like Frank Kermode noted that Eliot's work reflects not just a personal crisis, but a collective cultural and spiritual crisis following the war. Alongside Eliot, writers like Erich Maria Remarque in All Quiet on the Western Front, 1928, also conveyed the fragmenting effects of war on the individual and society through their artistic forms. Modernism was a groundbreaking cultural and artistic revolution that radically transformed literature, art, music, and architecture throughout the 20th century. It introduced bold experiments and new aesthetic approaches that defied traditional norms, reflecting the complexity and fragmentation of the modern world. Modernist artists sought to break with the past, both formally and conceptually, to capture the essence of modern life. Modernism can be seen as a response to the sweeping changes of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Unlike previous cultural movements, modernism distinctly rejected established norms and searched for new ways to represent reality. As literary historians Astridor Eysteinsson and Vivian Liska point out in Modernism, the movement was marked by a deep skepticism toward ideals such as objectivity, rationality, and morality. Modernism reshaped multiple art forms by embracing innovation and rejecting the old conventions of style, form, and content. Artists were driven by a desire to interpret and represent the challenges of modern life in ways that reflected its complexity. The technological advances of the era not only altered how people experienced time and space, but also influenced the forms art took. In literature, modernism broke away from realism and naturalism, rejecting the objective representation of reality. Instead, writers began experimenting with form and content to capture the fragmented nature of modern existence. Andreas Huyssen notes that modernism's formal experiments were an aesthetic response to the overwhelming sense of change and dislocation brought about by modern technology and urban life. In visual art, movements like Cubism, Dadaism, and Surrealism pushed boundaries, challenging traditional notions of form and representation. Artists like Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque, pioneers of Cubism, deconstructed objects into geometric shapes, encouraging viewers to see multiple perspectives at once. As art historian Christopher Green suggests, Cubism marked a crucial shift away from realism and towards a practice that embraced the complexity of perception and space. Surrealism, led by artists like Salvador Dali and René Magritte, delved into the unconscious and dreams, influenced by Sigmund Freud's theories. Their work sought to transcend the conscious mind, revealing hidden layers of human experience. Dali's The Persistence of Memory, 1931, where time and space appear fluid, exemplifies modernism's fascination with the irrational and the subconscious. In architecture, modernism, often referred to as the international style, revolutionized design. Architects like Le Corbusier and Ludwig Mies van der Rohe emphasized simplicity, functionality, and minimalism, rejecting the ornate styles of the past. Le Corbusier's Villa Savoye, 1931, and Mies van der Rohe's Seagram building from 1958 embodied the modernist principle that form follows function. In music, modernism brought profound changes as well. Composers like Igor Stravinsky and Arnold Schoenberg broke with centuries of tonal harmony. Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring from 1913 shocked audiences with its atonal structures and unconventional rhythms, while Schoenberg's 12-tone technique offered a new way of structuring music without traditional tonality. In literature, modernism sought to capture the subjective and fragmented nature of human consciousness. It broke away from the realism and naturalism that aimed to portray an objective world. As Peter Nichols points out in Modernism's A Literary Guide, modernist writers shifted their focus from the external world to an introspective exploration of individual consciousness and perception. Similarly, Peter Childs notes that modernism challenged the previous certainties of literature and culture by offering fragmentation, nonlinearity, and introspection as ways to reflect a world no longer seen as stable and coherent. Writers like James Joyce, Virginia Woolf, and T.S. Eliot revolutionized literature by abandoning traditional linear narratives and adopting techniques like stream of consciousness and multi-perspectivity. Their works reflected the chaos and alienation of modern life, focusing on the complexity of the human mind and experience. James Joyce's Ulysses, 1922, is a landmark of modernist experimentation. Its nonlinear structure and innovative narrative techniques shattered the conventions of earlier literary forms. Joyce's use of interior monologue and his deep psychological exploration of characters marked a new era in fiction. Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway, 1925, and T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, 1922, continued to push the boundaries of storytelling, exploring the fragmented nature of existence, alienation, and the fluidity of time.